Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Nader. In this video, we're going to go over a bunch of exercises together to get more practice with the Fetch API in JavaScript together. In the previous video, we went over in a bit of detail how the Fetch API actually works, how it actually literally opens up a whole new world for us where we can actually reach out across a network like the internet to different servers all around the world and pull back resources for us to use, whether those resources are things like HTML web pages, images, or JSON data, for example. So in this series of exercises, we're actually going to go a bit deeper into some of those concepts and kind of dig into things like JSON and pulling back image data. Super excited to get to these. Let's get right to the exercises. All right, so to start, as with all these exercises before, I have a bunch of comments at the top of each of these files. I'm just going to kind of read through all of these, and then I'll give you a chance to pause the video, think about it, and write out the code, and then we'll go through a possible solution together. I've started to include these as GitHub links in the bottom of the descriptions, so definitely check it out and download it from there if you just want to read through the code at your own time, or don't want to kind of type all this out yourself and download it through Git if you like. So for this warm-up exercise, what we want to do is we want to install Node Fetch if we don't have Node 18 or higher. So we went through this in the Fetch video. Newer versions of Node have it included. I'm using version 16, so I'm actually going to go with the old school way and actually download it so that you can see what that looks like as well. Then what we want to do is we want to make a request to this website right here, craigslist.org/about. So the about page for the Craigslist website, if you've seen that before. We'll actually visit this in our browser to take a look as well, just so we can kind of see what to expect. And then we'll come back and see if that matches what we see in our console. Then we want to print out the resulting HTML, which is basically the structure of the web page. We'll get to this when we get to the front end videos, but for the most part, this is just a bunch of text that's going to make up this web page. And we saw this in the Fetch API video, where it has just a bunch of different elements, and we can kind of see some strings in there regarding the content of the actual page. So we're actually going to pull that back, print it out to the terminal, and see if it matches what we actually see in our web browser, at least somewhat. All right, so go ahead and give that a shot yourself, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, so to start, I'm just going to go ahead and install Node Fetch. I'm just going to do this kind of for my entire folder because we're going to be doing this for every single one of these exercises. And we saw in the previous video that if Node doesn't find it kind of in a folder, it's just going to kind of keep looking up directories. So I'm just going to install it for this entire set of exercises all at once, so I don't have to keep installing it over and over again. So I'm going to do an npm init-y. I'm going to create a package.json file right here, right? Empty package.json. I'm just going to add type module to this, just so that we can actually use ES modules to import our Node Fetch. I'm going to head back here. Then I'm going to run npm install node-fetch. There we go, node-fetch. So again, you don't need to do this if you have a newer version of Node 18 or higher. Once we open up the package.json, there it is, node fetch. And now we can actually import it into our exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to say import fetch from node fetch. I'm going to console.log out the fetch just to make sure it actually is there and works correctly. So I'm going to run node warmup exercise just like that, and there we go. It's our async function, which is fetch, so we're good to go. So I'll just clear out my console there. Now let's take a look at this website. So I'm going to copy this, craigslist.org/about. I'm going to pull up my Chrome. I'm going to kind of I guess I'll Google for it just so we can take a look at it. So this is the about page for Craigslist, right? So if I click on that, we'll end up on this page. Now, I purposely chose Craigslist because it's quite a simple, like old school website. A lot of this HTML is what makes up this page right here is pretty easy to understand and pretty well formatted. So there's no crazy amount of like JavaScript and all this kind of stuff running behind the scenes, which we'll see when we get to front end. But effectively, if we just right click on the page somewhere and we go view page source, let's take a look at this. Let's just zoom in a tiny bit more. We can kind of see that it's not that much going on here, right? It's a pretty short page. We have some JavaScript going on here. Let's ignore that for now. We have some other stuff up here, which we can also ignore. But if we kind of scroll down a little bit, we'll get to kind of a little bit of the content. We can see that there's some text in here. Looks like there's a footer down here as well of some kind, and there's some more JavaScript at the bottom. So we want to at least see if we can kind of expect some of this stuff here, right? Help pages, FAQ, terms of use, privacy policy, contact form. Looks like there's some other stuff in here somewhere. I'm trying to figure out where we'd see. Oh yeah, so that matches all this stuff. There we go. Privacy policy, contact form, etc. Right? So we want to basically see this code. All right. So if we come back here, let's get rid of our console log. So we want to make a fetch request out to this website. So just as a recap, since this is the warm-up, I'm going to pull up my wonderful picture that I have from our previous video. We are here. We're sitting over here. We're not asking for a cat picture anymore, although we will be asking for a picture in a future exercise. But for now, we're just asking for the Craigslist about page. So we're going to make that request. It's going to go through the internet, and it's going to pop up the other side, hopefully at a server. And Craigslist probably has a bunch of these computers somewhere. I don't actually know where they're located, probably all across the world. And we're going to be asking for the about page. They're going to check to see if they have that. And they definitely do in this case, because we just looked at it, and they're going to send that back to us as a response. We know that response, though, is not a picture. It is an HTML file because it's a web page. So we're going to actually turn that into text so that we can print it out, just like we looked at right here when we looked at the page source. Okay, so that's kind of the process. So let's do this together. So we're going to do a fetch. And inside of here, we're going to fetch to this URL. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in here. All right. And now we can either use vanilla promises, or I could wrap this in an async await function. I'm just going to go with vanilla promises for now. So if we can do a .then in here, we're going to get back a response. So inside of this response, what do we want to do? Well, we want to actually turn this into kind of an HTML string. So if I console.log out just the response and I don't do anything with it, let's see what happens if I log this out. So I'm going to run node, I'm going to run the warm-up exercise, and it looks like we get back kind of this response object, right? So we saw that in the previous video. It has a whole bunch of stuff in its prototype, like the body and JSON and things like that. So let me just pull that up really, really quick. So if I go to the fetch API on MDN, we can see that this is the fetch API. Just going to pull that up just for our own references. Scroll down a little bit, and we'll eventually see these fetch headers, request, response. We saw a bit of this in the previous video. I'm going to click on fetch, scroll down a little bit here. So we're going to be doing this. We're not using options right now. We scroll down a little bit, and we're going to get back a promise that resolves to a response object, right? So that's what we're getting back right here. We're getting back a promise that's resolving to a response object. So if we look at that response object, and I'm going to click on that, it looks like there's a bunch of stuff in here, right? There's all of this stuff, okay? All this stuff right here. This is the instance methods, and we'll get to this when we get to classes, are the ones that are the most important. And the reason for this is that we're trying to extract stuff out of the body, technically, of this response. So we have to ask the question, what kind of data are we expecting to get back from this response? We have a few options. An array buffer is basically binary data. Same with a blob. So this would be things like images and music and videos and things like that. So we don't want that right now. Clone we can ignore for now. Form data we can usually ignore. That's like a form, which we'll see when we get to the front end. So we don't want that either. Then there's JSON and text. So JSON is a specific type of format. But it's not what we're looking for right now. It's going to be for the next exercise. That's going to be a very particular way to actually respond with data, which we'll see shortly. So the only one left really is response.text, returns a promise that resolves with a text representation of the body. Let's try that out. So in order to actually get this to work, we basically just have to do, if we come down here, they say fetch my request. They're using a slightly different method here, using an actual request object, but effectively the same thing. And then they're saying return the response.text, and then we have access to it in the next .then to actually use it somewhat. In this case, they're manipulating the browser's DOM, but since we don't have that in Node.js, we can just print it out or do something else with it. So we're interested in these two parts right here. So if I say console.log, if I get rid of that, I'm going to return back the response.text, just like that. And then I can do a .then. And over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back the HTML, and I'm going to console.log out the HTML. Okay, so this is technically the text that we get back. I just know it's HTML in this case because in this case, we're asking for the actual web page. So if I clear my browser, or clear my console, run this one more time, look at that, right? Pretty awesome. We're getting back the HTML for Craigslist about page. And if we scroll down, we kind of see some of the JavaScript that we saw in the view source. If we scroll down further, we get back to the actual HTML itself. And if we kind of read through this, we eventually see some of the stuff that we would see on the actual web pages, right? Like terms of the use, here's Jim, here's their CL jobs, right? There's all that kind of stuff in there, which actually matches what we see over here, right? There's Jim, there's their terms of use privacy policy, CL jobs is right here, right? So that all matches what we see over here, which also matches what's in the source code because that's what's being displayed on the actual screen. So we are getting back to this HTML and we're just printing it to the console because it's just text. The browser knows to take that text and display it like this for us, but really behind the scenes, it's just a bunch of text that looks like this. Perfect. Okay, I didn't want to belabor that too much, but it's really, really important to kind of watch the flow of that data because as we look with different types of responses, we're going to kind of be adding more complexity on top of this. Perfect. So that's what we want. And if we compare it right to the browser representation, we can see that they're actually pretty much the same thing. Now, one thing to note before we get to the next exercise, sometimes when we do this, we will get something different than what we would get with our browser. And there are many reasons for that, which are a little bit beyond the scope of kind of this video and Fetch in general. But I will cover that when we get to things like web scraping, because that's a really important topic. Technically, some servers can tell when the request is coming from like a browser or not a browser sometimes. So we can do things to fudge that around a little bit, but also we need ways to actually be able to sometimes run some of this JavaScript, which actually changes the page. And that's not what we're not doing that when we just print it out as text. So maybe this JavaScript actually changes the contents of the page, in which case we would need to actually figure out a way to run it so that we can get an updated page. All right. So just at the back of your mind, in case you're curious as to why some websites might be responding differently than a simple website like Craigslist. Okay, cool. Let's go to exercise number 1. All right, so for this one, same thing, install node fetch and kind of import it ES module style, right? So the import syntax. So I already did that. Hopefully you did it either in your folder just so you can keep using it just like I did. If not, go ahead and install it in your folder with npm install. But this time we want to make a request to this website, a slightly different website. This is a wonderful service by a bunch of wonderful folk on the internet. They host this placeholder API is what it's called. And we can kind of make different requests to it to practice using fetch and different types of API methods, which we'll get into in future videos. And the most important thing is that this API responds in JSON. Okay, so that's your hint for this video or for this exercise. This exercise is not text. We're not dealing with HTML, which I'm going to show you in a second. Okay, we are dealing with JSON data. So think about what type of request we want to parse or response we want to parse from this list of responses right here. If I go back a step, right, we are not dealing with text anymore. We are dealing with JSON. All right, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Okay. So you want to convert it to JSON and then print out that JSON and see what it looks like. And we want to kind of compare what is this JSON thing? How is it different from text? And like, what is this .json thing? I kind of gave it away a little bit doing for us behind the scenes. So I'll give you a moment to try that out. We want to make a request to this URL, print it out as a JSON object and see kind of what that result looks like. Okay, so to start, I'm just going to pull up this website right here. So I'm going to create a new tab. I'll just put that in here, move this down here a little bit. And if I make a request to this, you can see that I get back kind of this object is what it looks like. But this is technically not an object. This is actually JSON. If I did this in Firefox, it'd be displayed a little bit nicer. I don't have an extension on Chrome. Chrome has some extensions in the store that you can download for free that will actually display this a bit better. But this is effectively what's called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. It has curly brackets on the outer, and then its keys are strings, and then the values are numbers or strings or other JSONs or Boolean or things like that. Okay, so it's very, very structured data. You can see that this is not HTML, right? This is HTML. This is just a bunch of string text with curly, like angle brackets everywhere, and these things like HTML, head, body, etc. Right? That's all HTML. This is JSON. This is one example of JSON. We can have any key value pairs in here and as many as we want, and they can be nested inside each other. This API responds with a simple 1, 2, 3, 4 keys: user ID, which is number, ID, which is number, title, which is a string, and body, which is a string. So we want to get this and print it out as a JSON object, which is not a text object. Okay. So I want to show you kind of what that looks like. So if we kind of come back here, I'm going to do a fetch request, and this is going to work because I still have it installed, right? My node modules is here, and it's going to work correctly because I installed it for the entire folder. And I'm going to make a fetch request to this API. I'm going to do a .then, and I'm going to get back a response. Now, I want to see what happens if I do response.text. I'm going to use a short form format here, which is the implicit response, the kind of arrow function expression syntax, instead of this right here. These are the exact same thing. Since this is only one line of code, right, I can actually get rid of the return, I can get rid of the curly brackets, and it automatically assumes that I want to return this thing. Okay, then I can do .then again. I'm going to get back some, I guess, result, I'll call it for now, since I don't actually know what it is, and then I will console.log out that result. So let's see what happens if I run this. So I'm going to clear my console here. I'm going to run node exercise 1. And all right, so I get fetch is not defined. I got to import fetch from a node fetch. I got too excited there. Common error. Let's try this one more time. There we go. Okay, so it looks like it works, right? So what was all my hoo-ha about telling you to, maybe use JSON instead of text? Okay, so what is the difference between this? And that was what I was hinting at with the bonus right here. If we treat this body as just a string, it's fine. It's happy to treat it as a string, but I can't really use this in any meaningful way. Okay, what I want to do is be able to say kind of like this. I want to be able to say result.id, right? Or result.userid, or I think I need a dot there, right? And I want to be able to print these things out, right? So if I say console.log and I say result.id, for example, I'll just do that one. I would want to be able to see 1 printed out, right? Because that's the ID. Or let's just make it even more interesting. Let's just say title, right? I want this entire value for title to be printed out. Okay, if I run this, watch what happens. I'm going to get undefined. So that's because I want title, which is a property on result, but result is actually a string, right? So if I do console.log type of the result, let's see what we get. We're going to get a string. It is a string. I can't get properties off a string, right? This is not an object. So instead of text, if I come back to MDN here, if I look at response.json, this is going to take a response and read it to completion. It's going to return a promise with the result of parsing the body text as JSON. Okay, so if I instead change this to JSON now, instead of text here for what it gets returned as, and I try to run this one more time, check it out, right? It's a small change, but it makes a huge difference. And you might have noticed that now this is being colored correctly. So now the type of this is no longer a string, it's object. This is now a JSON, right? So I can actually pull values out of it. This is not a JSON. This is an object which was parsed out of a JSON. And now this is the actual title from the result. So technically what's happening is behind the scenes, if I had text, we haven't looked at this yet. What's really happening is this is happening. We're saying result is equal to JSON dot parse and then the result, right? Technically, this is what's happening behind the scenes. We're parsing this result, right, as a string, and then we're turning it into JSON so that we can, or an object, so we can actually grab stuff off of it. So we'll look at that in more detail in future videos, but for now, that's what we need to know, is that this JSON is just a nice helper to basically do that JSON.parse behind the scenes for us if we already know that the response is coming back as a JSON object. Okay, and there's many types of object, which is why we don't assume that it's text or JSON. In the fetch API, we have to manually tell it. Now, what we can do is we can actually print this out, which is what we have right here, which is the actual JSON object, right? So if I run this one more time, we'll see that this is an object now, which has been parsed from JSON string. And now we have the actual object, and we can actually pull out values for keys inside of this object using this dot syntax, which is absolutely fantastic, which we couldn't do if it was just a string. Okay. So what's happening behind the scenes, again, just to really hammer this home, is this string is being run through automatically JSON.parse and being given back to us as an object instead of a string, so that we can treat it as an object and grab values out of it. Okay, perfect. Let's go to exercise 2. All right, so for this one, same thing. We want to install Node Fetch if you don't have it installed already. And now we're going to start working with one of my absolute favorite APIs. We're actually going to be working with this with our project, which is coming up next. So definitely have it read through this API. It's a lot of fun. It's literally my favorite API. I work with it for all of my kind of starter fun projects. It's just a blast to work with and learn new concepts. So we're going to go to pokeapi.co. Just going to copy that. And what we want to do is we're going to ask for Pikachu's information. Okay, so this is an API that responds with JSON data. Okay, so remember to parse this as JSON. And if you take a look at Pikachu's data, which is located at this URL, and you can take a look at the actual website to get a feel for how this URL is actually constructed and the response that comes back, which I'll do really quick as well. You want to print out Pikachu's official artwork URL. Okay, that's the goal for this exercise. So inside of this JSON field for Pikachu's response, there is an official artwork URL. Okay, it's under the key, I think something. I don't want to give it away, and then official artwork, and then front default or something like that, I believe. Okay, and that's going to be a URL that if you copy and paste it into your browser, you'll get the artwork for, in this case, Pikachu. And it turns out if you replace Pikachu with another Pokemon name, it will actually give you back that Pokemon's official artwork, which is super amazing. So what I want you to do is actually grab that in Node.js as JSON and actually print out that URL so you can easily copy and paste it and visit it to make sure it actually is valid and works correctly. Okay, now here is a small hint for you, because this is where people get tripped up a lot when they see APIs that have kind of odd namings for their keys. Look at this key right here. Okay, there is a dash in the middle. What we can't use is the dot notation to access keys that have special characters in them like this. If this was an underscore, it would work, but since it's a dash, we have to use the square bracket notation to access this key. So that's my hint for you. So go ahead and try that. See if you can print out Pikachu's official artwork URL and actually get it logging to your screen, not the image logging to your screen, just the URL, so you can copy and paste it and actually visit it to make sure it works. All right, let's take a look at this together. So I'm going to import fetch from Node Fetch just so I don't forget this. And now I want to actually visit this pokeapi.co. So I'm going to go back to Chrome here. I'll open up a new tab real quick. I'll go to pokeapi.co. Zoom in a little bit. So this is a RESTful Pokemon API, right? Super amazing. I love the folk who actually built this API. Definitely my heroes. I love them very much. So if you scroll down here, what you'll see is this is the URL we can use to access kind of information about Pokemon. They have other URLs too if you want specific information, and you can click on them for examples. But for example, if I have this URL right here, and then I do /Pokemon/ a name of a Pokemon, and then I do a fetch, I will get back all of this information right here. So you can see they've parsed this JSON for us so that we can actually take a look at it. This is just JSON data. Okay, so to prove this to you, what I'll do is I'll copy this URL right here, and I'll create a new tab, and I'll make this nice and big. So I don't actually have a JSON extension installed for Chrome. I should probably do that. I have it installed for Firefox, which is what I normally use. But we can see that we get back a whole bunch of data, right? Look at the scroll bar. Look at the scroll bar. Oh my goodness, right? Hopefully that doesn't make you dizzy, but there's a lot of stuff in here, right? So I'm going to go back to this one to actually read it a little bit easier. I think I zoomed in too far there. We can see that there's a whole bunch of keys and values. Okay, so since this is JSON, we can treat it as an object once we've parsed the JSON. So if we're thinking of artwork, where would that be inside of this object, basically? So would it be in abilities? Probably not. Forms? I don't know, probably not. Game indices? Don't know what that is. Held items? Probably not. There's all this stuff here. Moves? Probably not. Species? No. Sprites? Okay, maybe. Sprites actually is a like a two-dimensional representation usually of images that kind of pop up on the screen to some degree. So maybe it's in there. Stats? Not really. Types? Not really. Okay, let's look at sprites. Okay, so I open up sprites. There's 10 keys in here. Back, shiny, cool. Shiny female and all that kind of stuff. Cool. Other, dream world, front, home. Oh, there it is. Official artwork, front default. Okay, so I want this image. So if I copy this URL right here, right, and this should work for pretty much any Pokemon. I create a new tab and I paste that in. Oh, look at that. That's Ditto, right? That's so cute. Okay, so I'm going to change this. I'm going to change this to one of my favorite Pokemon. Let's go for Mew. And I do a search for Mew. Let's see if this is true for Mew too. So I'll scroll down to sprites, official artwork. I'm going to grab this one here. And I'm going to create a new tab and paste that in. Oh my goodness, look at that. There's Mew. Oh, beautiful. Okay, so that works. So that's the official artwork. So let's think about this. This is under sprites, and then it's under other, and then it's under official artwork, and then it's under front default. Okay, like that's a lot to remember. Let's just go one step at a time. So let's actually just get this working to start. So I want to do a fetch to, let's just go with this URL, which is Pikachu to start. Then I'll do a .then. Then I'm going to get back a response. And I know that this value that I'm going to get back is JSON data, right? It's going to need to be parsed as JSON. I can do it manually myself if I did it as text, but why not just let the fetch API do that for me? So I'm going to say response.json. Okay, save myself an extra step there. Then I'm going to get the actual, I'm going to call this the Pokemon object. And then I'm just going to console.log out this Pokemon object. See what we get. See if this actually works. So I'm going to bring back my terminal here. I'm going to run node exercise 2. Ooh, look at that. Awesome. Okay, I think I get way too excited when I see this stuff. But we have abilities, base experience, forms, all this kind of stuff in here. Moves, a whole bunch of objects. Wow, it's a lot of moves. Name is Pikachu. Order, past type, species. And then, oh, I see some sprites in here. Look at that, sprites, other, official artwork. And then there's some stuff in here that we can't see because it's really deeply nested. Okay. First of all, before I go further with this, I get really giddy with excitement when you see this. I hope you do too. It's just so amazing, right? If you think about what's actually happening here, we are literally talking to a server that could be halfway across the world asking for Pokemon information, and they're kind enough to save this information on their servers so that we can keep asking them this information and getting back all this cool information about Pokemon. Right? Really, really, really awesome. Like just totally amazing. This is one of my favorite APIs to work with. Okay, enough gushing there. So let's take a look at grabbing some of these keys out. So I'm going to say console.log. I'm going to do Pokemon object.sprites. So that's this object right here. I want to grab the sprites. So let's see if I clear this out and I run this again. Do I get the sprites? Okay, cool. So look at that. I got just the sprites. Now I want to grab other, which is inside of sprites, right? So this is a key inside of sprites, just like all this back default and back shiny and things like that. So I'm going to do .other. Okay, this is much easier to do if you have a JSON extension that you're kind of viewing it kind of in this kind of format, right? It's much easier to kind of click on these and be like, okay, like I want to go to sprites, and then I want to go to kind of other here, right? So it depends on how you're viewing this. It might be easier to do it this way here as well. So if I do .other, okay, and we're narrowing it down, check it out. So now we have Dream World, we have Home, and then we have official artwork. Okay, so this is the hint that I gave you. We can't do this. We can't do .official-artwork, right? We can't do this because a dash is a minus sign in JavaScript. Okay, so how do we do this? We need the other notation to grab keys out of an object if it's a special character. So we can do this, official-artwork, and then this entire thing inside of here is a string, right? So we're saying the same thing. This is the same thing as a dot notation, but it works for object keys that have special characters that wouldn't normally be able to be using the dot notation. So we're saying inside the other key, basically dot official artwork. So let's try this, see what we get. And there we go. Okay, we're close, now we just gotta go front default. Now this is an underscore, so that's allowed. So I'm going to say, I'm gonna just put this on many lines so that you can actually see this split up here. And I'll say dot front underscore default. Still puts it on one line for me. Oh, prettier is messing with me. Okay, so dot front default is the last part right there. Okay, so if I run this now, look at that. Okay, whew, awesome. So we get the PNG. So if I copy this, let's take a look if this is correct. So if I copy this and I go to my web browser and fingers crossed, all right, I paste it in, fingers crossed. Oh my gosh, look at this Pikachu. That's amazing. That's awesome. That's awesome. So that's pretty cool, right? So what we did here is we made a request out to this URL, right, which is set up to respond with Pikachu's JSON object, right, which is that whole thing, right? It's this entire thing right here with all this stuff in it. Then we said, okay, like I know that's JSON, turn it into JSON for us so that we can easily do like this dot notation instead of treating it as a string. Then we knew by traversing through these key value pairs that we eventually could get to this official artwork string inside here, and then we were able to grab it and actually print it out. All right, super cool. So after I go through exercise 3, if you're curious about this and you want to do that all within Node, there is a way to actually save this. We're actually going to go through this in our project video. So very excited to get to that, where we'll actually be able to download things as images and not have to go to our browser to look at it. But for now, we're just going to stick with this without getting too complicated. But that leads us to exercise 3, which is what we're going to go to next. And I have a word of warning for you. This one is definitely a little bit more complicated than these. So definitely make sure you feel comfortable with these concepts, play around with them, try to grab different keys out of these, ask for different types of values. Make sure you're comfortable with traversing the JSON object that comes back. Try different Pokemon, maybe even try a different URL that has like abilities or stats or something like that, and see if you can get that working. Once you're good at that and you feel comfortable, you can join me with exercise 3, and we're going to kind of take it even further. All right, so let's take a look at this together. All right, so for this one, I want to be able to actually download an image, okay, all through Node.js. So what we did previously was we logged out the string for the image, then we visited that string in our browser and then viewed the image there. What if we could actually download that image directly in Node so that we could actually kind of open it up like right over here by double clicking on it? That would be pretty amazing, okay? So this is going to give us really good practice for the project, which is coming next. And this is one component of that project. So you'll definitely get a lot of practice here if you're able to get through this exercise. So enough of that, let's go through what this actually does. So same thing, we want to install node fetch, right? If you're using a Node version less than 18. And then we want to install fs from fs/promises. Now, you don't need to npm install this, because it's actually built into Node.js. All we need to do is import it like this. So import fs from fs/promises. We can do fs without promises, but the promises one is the newer one that allows us to use async await as well as promises on it, which is a bit cleaner of an API instead of what's called the callback API, which is the previous fs. But it's really up to you. I would just suggest the promise version. This is short for file system, and it's going to allow us to actually work with the file system, which is what we need to save files. Okay, now, this is the hard part. So we want to, I just realized I numbered these wrong. These are 3 and 4. But we want to go to wallhaven.cc, which we looked at in the fetch exercise video. And I want you to find a wallpaper that you like. Okay, I'm actually just going to do this right now so you don't get stuck at this stage. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to Google for Wallhaven. You can Google for it. You can just go to it directly, wallhaven.cc right here, right? That's the URL, wallhaven.cc. we landed on this page, right, which is a bunch of great wallpapers. You can definitely look at them at your leisure. Just pick one that you like. Okay, so for example, let's say I like this kind of sunset right here, right? I'm gonna click on this sunset, right? Super cute image. So what we want to do is once you've clicked on one, I want you to visit the page just like I did, and then I want you to right click the image and open it in a new tab so you can actually get that image itself. So what I mean by that is right now you can see that I have kind of this image here, but then there's all this other stuff around it, right? There's all this extra information. This is all HTML. For the Fetch API to work correctly at downloading an image, at least the way that we have it right now without doing fancy web scraping, we just need the actual resource itself. So the best way to do that is to right click on the image. In Chrome, it's open image in new tab. It might be a similar wording or just slightly different in Firefox or Safari or anything like that, but you should be able to open the image in a new tab. Then once I click on that tab, now I can actually see just the image. And if you look at this URL, you will see that this is a JPEG. It might be a little bit small, but the URL effectively looks something like this. Okay, so make sure it ends with a .png or a .jpg, just like this, and then you're good to go, right? So again, you're gonna click on one of the images, right? And then right click, open a new tab, and you can open that tab and copy that URL, make sure it ends with the actual extension. Perfect. So once you have that, use that URL for this exercise. What you want to do then is you want to fetch that URL, which is the image. Now, the hard part of this, or the tricky part, I should say, not necessarily hard, is your job is to figure out how to parse this image. Okay, is it text? Is it JSON? Is it something else? Right? And then what you want to do is you want to use this FS library, which is built into Node, which is this one right here, to actually write that file to your file system or save that file to your file system. Okay, just have a typo in here. And this is going to be the part where you're going to need to do a lot of Googling. Okay, so I've made this purposely challenging for you so you can get more practice using APIs that you haven't seen before. In this case, you're going to want to probably Google how to actually save something to your file system in Node using FS promises, as well as how do you actually parse out an image from the Fetch API. Is it text? Is it JSON? What really is it? Okay, so ideally when you run this script, what's going to happen is you run kind of node exercise 3.js, and then you will see this image or the image that you chose as an image here that you can click on and actually open up inside of VS Code to take a look at and actually save to your file system. All right, so have fun with this one. It's going to be full of frustration, but I promise you once you do get through it, it's going to be totally amazing. So I'll give you a chance to go through that and then we'll go through it together. All right. Perfect. So let's slowly kind of tackle this one. So to start, I want to import fetch from node fetch. Then I said I wanted to import fs from fs/promises. Okay. So this is the fetch API and this is the file system API to actually work with the file system. Great. Then I'm going to go to Wallhaven and find a wallpaper that I like, right? So I'm just going to copy this URL. Let's just say I picked that one. So what we're going to do then is we're going to say fetch, and I'm going to fetch that URL. Okay. Then what I want to do is do a .then. I'm going to get back a response, and then I need to figure out like what do I do here, right? This is an image, right? So let's go back to Google, and I'm going to go back to kind of the response API here. Now you could do this many ways. I'm just going to go back to the response because that's the object that we're working with. I'm going to see if I see any hints in here. So I'm going to kind of read through this. We've seen text. This is a promise that resolves with a text representation. Well, an image isn't really text, so I don't think that makes sense. JSON, a promise that resolves with the result of parsing the response body text as JSON. Well, we saw that that probably doesn't make sense, right? Because our response doesn't really look like this. It's an image, right? Okay, so it doesn't really make sense. Form data, I'm just going to tell you it's not that, okay? We're not going to really go through that. Same with clone. This doesn't really make sense. Okay, so we're kind of left with these two. So what are these two? So blob returns a promise that resolves with a blob. Wow, thanks MDN, super helpful. Maybe I'll have to take a look at that. Response array buffer returns a promise that resolves with an array buffer. Okay, thanks MDN again, very useful. Let me open these in new tabs and take a look. So blob and array buffer. All right, what is a blob? A blob is a file-like object. Okay, that sounds great. That is immutable raw data. All right, it can be read as text or binary data, and a whole bunch of confusing stuff over here. All right, so that sounds pretty promising. I like the fact that they said file raw data. That sounds good. Binary data. Okay, let's take a look at array buffer. This is a generic fixed length raw binary data buffer. Wow, that's a lot of confusing words. A bunch of bytes, a byte array. Wow, this sounds really complicated. I don't really know if I want to use that one. Maybe we need to use it. I don't really know. I'm going to go with blob. I like this file object thing. Let's see if that works. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to VS Code here. So they say in order to actually use this, we had to do, where was it? Response.blob, right? So since I called this response, I'm going to say response.blob. I'm going to use the same syntax here, which is a short arrow function expression syntax, which is the implicit return. If you don't like that, you can just put the curly brackets and say return response.blob. Then I'm just going to say I get back the image, hopefully. And let's take a look at what this is, right? I'm going to say console.log this image. Okay. I don't know what that means. What does it mean to console log a blob? I have no idea. Let's figure it out. What's the worst that could happen, right? So I'm going to run node. I haven't even used file system API yet. Probably something's going to be breaking here, but let's take a look. And okay, that was totally anticlimactic. Interesting. So maybe it worked. I don't really know. Did this work? Huh. Okay, so let's go back to Chrome. I'm going to pull up Google, and I'm going to say node save file to computer. Okay, if I Google that, how do I write a file in NodeJS? If I click on that one, this is their website. If I kind of make this a bit bigger for you, they have require FS. Okay, so this is CommonJS. Pretty close to what we have. I guess we'll have to probably look up the promise version. They're doing a write file, file name, and then data, and then some other stuff. Looks like these are maybe optional. The file path, string or buffer. Okay, well, we saw this word before. Array buffer, I think it was. Maybe we need that. I don't know. Let's look at the example here. I want to write hello world to hello world.txt. Okay, so require FS, maybe same thing as import, write file, hello world.txt, hello world. Okay, so we don't want to write hello world, we want to write some image data. So do we just give it the blob? All right, I don't really know. Let's try it out. So you know what, maybe let's just look at node save file fs promises. Let's see if that is different. fs.promises, I'm going to click on this API right here. For Node.js, this is a super old version. I want to maybe go to a newer version. Let's go with 14 at least. Probably, let's go with 16, which is what I'm using. You can go with 19 if you like. If I scroll down here, I'm jumping around a lot, but this is kind of what you do when you're programming, right? Let's look through all these. Blah, 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 read file, write. Okay, look here, write file or write. I don't know. I saw write file before, so I'll click on that one. How does this work? Asynchronously writes data to a file. That's what we want to do. Replacing the file if it already exists. Okay. Where did my stuff go here? It can be data can be a string, a buffer, async iterable, or an iterable. Okay. Interesting. So they say basically you give it two things, data and options. Okay. Interesting. So what about the name of the file? Where does that go? This is a bit weird. All right. So, you know, this API looks a bit different than what I saw on the other one. So I'm just kind of gonna go with one of these or the other. I'm just gonna try it out, right? You can probably sit there and read the documentation, but honestly, a lot of time it just makes sense to just try it out and see what happens. I know that's not always the best advice because you really want to understand what's happening, but just for sake of example, it probably makes sense to actually just start writing away, see what happens. So I'm gonna say fs.writeFile. Okay, so VS Code is helping me out a little bit here. It's saying that, okay, we want the file path. Okay, so, well, let's just call it wallpaper.jpg. Okay, I'm just gonna, it doesn't really matter if it's JPG or PNG. Let's just go with one or the other. Actually, this one's PNG, so maybe I'll just match it. I'll just say PNG, you know? Maybe there is a difference. They're slightly different formats. All right, then I do comma, then it's saying a data. which is a string or an array buffer view. Okay, well, I don't have an array buffer. I have a blob. Maybe that'll work, or any of this other stuff. Okay, so it looks like this write file is taking the name of the file that we want to write. So it's going to create a wallpaper, and then it's going to hopefully save this thing right here, which is the blob, right? So I'm going to just say, save the image for me, please. Now, this is a promise, so technically we can await this if we had an async function, or we could just leave it as is. But let's just see what happens. So I'm going to run node exercise 3, fingers crossed. Okay, it didn't work. We got an error. So what is the error? Type error. The data argument must be of type string or an instance of buffer, typed array, or data view. We received an instance of blob. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. So they're saying that we gave write file a blob here, but write file wanted a, what was it? A string, a buffer, a typed array, or a data view. Okay, so let's go back to Google here. Let's kind of, I'll go back a few. Let's just say node save image file. Yeah, let's go with that. Writing image file to computer. Downloading image files. All right. You know what? Stack Overflow. Why not? Let's just take a look at what people say. Oh my goodness. This is crazy. Look at this. Oh my gosh. What is going on here? I don't know what that question is. Let's see if we can scroll down to the answers. Maybe we can see some code here. Require FS. Okay, that's nice. That's nice. Create write stream. Oh gosh, that looks complicated. This all looks kind of complicated. Not a fan, not a fan. Just showing you the process here, just so you can get a feel for how frustrating this can be in real life. Let's go with FS promises, maybe. Promise. Maybe we'll find something in here. So we can say download an image using node request. How do you download a file from NodeJS? FS write file. Okay, let's take a look at this. If we scroll down here, require copy file, promise all. Okay. So you know what? I'm actually going to save file FS promises. So if we look at FS promises again, and I change it back to our kind of more latest version. I don't know why it does this. I should probably go up here. I'm going to just go through documentation, because sometimes the documentation really does help. You just need to spend time reading through it. Now, I'm purposely, again, doing this just so you can feel kind of a bit of the pain. So we wanted to do file.write file. Now, data can be a buffer, a typed array, a data view, or an async iterable. Okay, so you know what? Let's just try it as a buffer. It didn't seem to like a blob, but it seemed to like maybe this is a buffer. Is that the same thing? Right? I don't know. Let's just try out array buffer. Let's see what happens. Maybe they're different. So if I say dot array buffer instead of dot blob, is that going to help? Let's see. So if I do exercise 3, okay. So not really. It's still saying that the argument must be of type string, buffer, a typed array, or a data view. Okay, so let's take a look at this array buffer thing. It's a blob interface. Okay, so it's again very similar to a blob. It's not really gonna work the same as a buffer looks like. All right, so they're kind of giving us some examples here, but this is probably not going to be very useful for us. We need to figure out how to actually save this using FS promises. Okay, so I'm going to go back again once more to my, where was it, file system, and I'm going to go back to Google. Again, I'm going to, hopefully you're bearing with me while I'm kind of going through this process, because this is exactly what happens as you work through this in real life. Node save array buffer FS promises. Okay, I'm just going to kind of keep going through this. Let's go with one of these: buffer NodeJS array buffer. How to pass a buffer binary data. Let's look at this one. Read stream binary data. Okay, so this kind of seems useful. We want to write a file. Okay, so we're trying to do this, right? We're trying to do this. So eventually you'll probably land on something like this, whether it's in a documentation or someone's blog post or Stack Overflow. Buffer, yeah, okay, I see a bunch of buffer stuff in here. Require FS. What the heck is this? I don't know, but maybe it's an image, I guess. Data, sure. Oh, look at this. Okay, so what is this? Buffer from. So they use this buffer from thing to turn data into a buffer, I guess. So let's look at that. So we'll say buffer from. Okay, so buffer from, what is this buffer? Let's scroll down a little bit. I guess I have to probably take a look at buffer dot, let's take a look at dot from. There it is. Static method buffer dot from allocates a new buffer. Okay, buffer dot from. I wonder if it's included. Let's just try it. It's going to turn it into a buffer for us. Okay, so I mean that's what it's saying. It's saying I want a buffer. Let's just try this. I don't know. Do I need array buffer? Do I need blob? Let's try this buffer from thing that we saw before. So we'll do buffer dot from, and we'll try this. And I'm going to clear out my console and do this one more time. And oh my gosh, something happened. Oh my gosh. Okay, wallpaper.png. Did it work? Oh, look at that. Okay, that's pretty awesome, right? So we got our image. This was a different image than when I showed you because the URL I had saved was different. So it looks like this buffer thing is going to create like this buffer from this data. So I wonder if I change this to blob. This is fun testing that you can do, and I delete this image. Is this still going to work? Did we really need the array buffer, or was it the buffer from that we needed? So now we're getting an error again. It looks like we did need the array buffer to actually pass into buffer. So this wanted an array buffer as its argument. It looks like it wanted an array buffer. So we had to pass buffer.from an array buffer. It turned it into this buffer thing, and then Node is able to take it and write it to our file system. Now, this is a promisified version. So technically, if we were doing other things that relied on this, what we could do is turn this into an async function. And if we really wanted to wait for this to be written to our file system before we proceeded, we can just await to this, right? And then we can say console.log file written successfully, for example, just like that, right? So if I run this, there we go, file written successfully, right? And then we know we're good to go. Now, technically what we should do is have a whole bunch of try catches in here as well for error handling, but I left those out for the sake of being concise with the code, just so that we can actually not make this video too long and focus on the actual kind of core of the problem. But just to recap this exercise, since there's so much going on, we needed to save this image to our file system. This is binary data. And it is treated differently than regular JSON data or text data, for example. It turns out even this blob thing didn't work, right? So to go into detail about all that stuff would probably be way beyond the scope of this video. Sometimes you just need to try some of these things and just test them out. I know that sounds very scary when you're first looking at it. And really, I'm the kind of person who loves to understand everything before I actually try it. But sometimes, instead of just banging your head against the wall, you really need to just try it out and try different things here and there, mix different things together. And then you can look at the code and see like, okay, does this make sense? Now, retroactively, can I look back and kind of introspect into my code to see like, okay, I see why it was yelling at me before. This makes much more sense, right? So what we're doing is we're turning the response into an array buffer, right? Whatever that is. That's some kind of binary format. Okay, it's not text and it's not JSON. Then when we have that data, we can pass that to fs write file, which takes a data property. Now that data property it was telling us was this. It could be a string, an array buffer view, or these other things right here. So we were struggling to turn it into this buffer thing. It turns out that this array buffer and this buffer were not compatible with each other for some reason. Okay, so if we take this buffer.from, we can take that and turn it into a regular buffer, which is what this expects. Now, is that important for our purposes? Probably not. If you want to really study the internals of this, you definitely could figure out what the difference is between buffer and array buffer and blob and all these different things. And I would encourage you to do so eventually one day. But for now, this is just a good practice to fail a bunch of times, read through documentation, read through Stack Overflow, try to reframe kind of the problem and Google for different things, and eventually land on a solution that works once you combine different ideas and actually try to get a sense of what's happening behind the scenes. Now, I purposely want to include some of that process for you behind the scenes so you can see what that's like instead of just showing you the answer, because I don't think that's as valuable. So hopefully you found that interesting. Now, that said, this is set up to prepare us for the project, and that is the video that's going to come next. So I hope this video was valuable for you. If you found this video valuable, I would love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. As well, I'd love to hear in the comments, how was the process for you of actually searching through all this stuff? Was it just as painful as kind of what I was doing? Did it take you longer? Was it faster? Did you already know how to do it? Or did you use a totally different method? Because this is just one possible solution. Also, in the next video, what we're going to do is actually expand on this even further. And I'm super excited to do that because that's going to be kind of the capstone project for this part of the series. Now that we've learned enough of these concepts, we can actually take these and start to build really hefty applications. So I don't want to give away too much for that, but in the next video, what we're going to do is build a Pokemon app that is effectively going to allow us to download all sorts of data from this API from our terminal using quite a nice nifty interface using different packages from NPM. So I'm super excited to build up that project in 2 sets of videos where we're going to go over conceptually what's going on and some tips for you, very similar to the Blackjack project, and then actually getting into the solution itself, or one possible solution where we kind of code it out together. So super excited to get to that video. I'll see you there.